The first gentleman up is Michael Doane. Michael Doane is with the Nature Conservancy. Michael Doane is a trained agriculturalist with many years of experience in agribusiness. He has been a leader in communications in a number of areas. Some of them, if he wishes to talk about them, are quite interesting on a pathway we thought might happen at one time with hybrid wheat, which has not happened as of yet. But Michael has a BS in agribusiness and a master's in agricultural economics, both at Kansas State University. He's kind of a purple. And then if you get him over to Kansas City, he's a rabid Royals fan, so he's kind of blue in that regard. But he is dynamic, to say the least. Please welcome our first speaker of the day, Michael Doane.
So the year was 2012, and the location was St. Louis. More specifically, it was in a boardroom in the headquarters of Monsanto, and that's where I was. I was the vice president of sustainable agriculture for Monsanto. Now, I'd done lots of jobs at Monsanto. This wasn't my first, but it was a really interesting job, being the head of sustainability for Monsanto. And I was sitting there evaluating a proposal. And the proposal came from an organization I knew pretty well. I had worked with a number of people in this organization, and there was just something about the people that drew me in. I liked them. I thought they were honest. I thought they did good work. They did what they said. I liked spending time with them. They had an optimism to them that really attracted me. And they said, "We've got a proposal for you. It'll be in 3 slides." I said, "Well, that's going to be interesting. And oh, by the way, there's only 1 word on each slide." I was like, well, this is going to be interesting yet. The first slide was science. And they said, "You need to know we're a science-based organization. If it isn't science-based, we're not on with it. So we take the science really seriously." I like that. They said the other thing is we're very pragmatic. We have trustees in every state, and these are people that live in rural communities. They're people that farm or ranch or own land, run successful businesses. We're not into hyperbola. We're into solutions. We like to get things done. We're pragmatic. I like that a lot. And then they said something that shocked me even more and actually kind of drew me in closer yet. They said, "We're hopeful." And that's when I decided to kind of take all the chips that were sitting in my corner and put them in, because this was an environmental NGO talking to me as a leader at Monsanto and talking about hope and optimism and being hopeful about the future. You know, it's really easy to sell fear. It's too easy. And unfortunately, it happens a lot. So when an organization comes along and says, "We have big challenges, but we also think we can solve them if we work together, if we do things differently," you know, I'm ready to sign up for that. So you fast forward, and I actually went all the way from doing the deal that day to a year ago joining this very same organization. And the organization is the Nature Conservancy. Now, some of you may know who the Nature Conservancy is. Some of you may be members. We probably have a few trustees in the audience. We have a chapter right here in Iowa. We're a local organization. In every state, we have a chapter. And that chapter has a set of trustees who, again, are successful in their own walk of life, but have a deep and abiding commitment to conserving the land and water upon which all life depends. That's our mission. That's our mission as an organization. The organization didn't get started yesterday. It's got 65 years of history. It was started in 1951 by a group of ecologists who found a rare plant that they felt like was so important that it must be protected. And so they actually went out and mortgaged their home to put together enough capital to actually buy the land and protect the plant. And for 40 or 45 years, the organization bumped along, doing deals like that, where either through fee or easement strategies, they protected land. They did bigger and bigger deals. But they were kind of known as the rare plant, rare species organization. If it's rare and special, we want to protect it. That changed over time. We still do that. We still are a land trust. We pioneered the land trust movement. We still have a constituency for that. We still see it as vital to our mission. But when we looked at this about 10 years ago, we said, we've been wildly successful, and altogether we protected just over 100 million acres. Now, just to put that in context, there's 3.75 billion acres of farmland in the world, okay? So that's not a strategy for scale. That's not a strategy for conserving all the land and water upon which life depends. So they said, we need to start to work with industry, with governments, on solutions that work in the wheels of commerce, work in the way that business works. And so that's what kind of pulled me in. Today we have 600 scientists, we have 1 million members, many active members. We're active in 40 countries, on 6 continents. Again, a chapter in every state, but we're changing our organization. We're evolving from focusing on rare places, special places, to how does the world evolve to meet the greatest challenges that we have before us. And so with that as a mandate, we now think about places not only rare and special, but also so important that they are actually important at a planetary scale, and that's why we're here today. This is a special place. Iowa is a breadbasket. This place needs to be super productive to feed the world. And so here we are. We're talking about agriculture. And what I'd like to also kind of point to is the really interesting thing that goes on here around soil. Healthy soil, as we think about it, is in fact, if you think about land and water as the means to preserve life, healthy soil is the cornerstone of that whole proposition. Within soil, we have 1/4 of the world's biological diversity. Healthy soil provides that ecosystem. We're producing 95% of the world's food on these soils. Healthy soil filters water in a unique way, stores water in a special way. And from a carbon storage standpoint, soil is actually the biggest ecosystem we have to actually take carbon out of the atmosphere, put it to work in the soil, and put it to work in a way that really provides productivity for us. So healthy soil, as we have come to understand it, is actually biologically alive. It's a diverse system of microbes and small organisms, large organisms, working together to really kind of create this system of biological diversity. So what's the problem? What's the problem with this equation? In a nutshell, we are losing our healthy soils, okay? This is a graph that actually looks at some of the data from the Morrow plots at the University of Illinois, Champaign, Illinois. And as you can see, we're actually losing what is called the organic matter in these soils at a rate that is shocking. So when the prairies, or the forests as they were cleared and converted to agriculture, a lot of these soils were 6, 7, 8% soil organic matter. Today, many of those soils have lost anywhere from 50 to 80% of their soil organic matter. Now that's a problem. That's a problem that is actually costing us money in terms of productivity. It's also challenging the way that we kind of manage nutrients, the water use, and the carbon cycle around those soils. Science shows us that for each 1% of soil organic matter level in the soil, we can sequester a large amount of carbon, we can cycle nutrients more efficiently, and we can store water more efficiently. Okay? But why are they so increasingly rare? That's what I'd like to investigate today. I'd like to kind of pull that apart and kind of investigate where we're at today, but also where we could go in the future. So to do that, I want to also kind of tell you about my own personal journey on this healthy soil issue. I grew up in Kansas on a farm, a heritage that I know many of us share. And in this farm, I had many opportunities to work as a young child. So putting in cows, we got a lot of lights going up and down here, so just trying to make sure you're all awake, I guess. So all the duties on a farm, got to do them from a young age. and really learned a lot. But at the age of 14, my father came to me with a proposition. He said, "Are you interested in going to college?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm probably going to go to college." "Well, how are you planning to pay for that college?" he asked me. And I hadn't given it much thought. And he said, "Well, if you want to go to college, you need to figure out how you're going to pay for it. And one way you could do that is to start to farm." I was like, "Well, I'm already working on the farm." He said, "No, owning a farm, managing a farm." And so he gave me this wonderful opportunity. He really facilitated my entry into farming at the age of 14. And so I started farming, had some rough moments, but actually got along pretty well. One farm that came up for rent close by, and this was in the late 80s, so a time where the near rearview mirror was pretty painful, okay? In the late 80s, a farm came up for rent, and this was a farm from a guy that had actually gone out of farming. And this farm was known as a place that wasn't well kept. When you drive by, you saw what looked to be a lot of weeds, a lot of growth on the fields. The crops didn't look very good. And of course, he had left the business. So, kind of the conclusion was that he was a poor manager. So I actually had the opportunity to rent this farm. I was a little trepidatious about that, as you can imagine. Is this land any good? That was kind of the thinking that was going through my mind. So I took it on, and I went out to fix that farm. And I took an implement out of the hedgerow, a disc, went out to start to till the soil, and I found something remarkable as I pulled into the field. I expected it to be pretty rough, pull pretty hard, and actually when I started across the field, it pulled easy. And I was surprised by that. I turned around, looked back, and there were a lot of birds kind of coming into the soil, looking at, they were obviously feeding on whatever was there. And I noticed at that time how dark, how rich the soil was. And I was struck by it. I actually got out of the cab, went down, got into the soil, started to smell it, and it smelled different than anything I had ever been exposed to in my life. Now, we've all been around soils. Some of us have been around soils that smell super fertile. Some of us have never experienced that. So the only thing I can compare it to, and it's something that I love, is when somebody makes fresh baked bread in the house, and you can smell that aroma wafting through the air. How inviting and how fresh and how wholesome that smells. That's how that soil smelled to me that day. It was remarkable. Well, I didn't quite figure out what was going on with this farm. I couldn't figure out if this soil is so good, so fertile, so black, how did this farmer not make it? And so we ended up farming it, and I got along just fine. I got through college, but I didn't know what happened, okay? I just farmed it in a traditional way. I farmed it in the ways that we knew. And it wasn't until a few years ago that I became exposed to some of these issues around soils and the biological functioning of soils, the idea of dead soils versus alive soils, healthy functioning soils. And I realized at that time, unfortunately, that farmer didn't have the technology or the capital to follow through on his plan to build a healthy soil, and he went out of business. And then I basically used the fertility that he had built all those years in a few years to have kind of supercharge my productivity. But as all the synapses were firing for me, when I realized that, I began to think, this is a revolutionary idea. This is not happening today. Very few people know about healthy soils. This is an opportunity that we need to seize. And we are now starting to see a movement. We are starting to see farmers think not only about the chemical functions of soil, the physical functions of soil, the minimizing the loss of soil, but also the biological function of soil. So this is not new for some of you. Some of you in this room, I'm sure, know a lot more about this than I do. But what is interesting is we now have the emergence of technology that's starting to kind of come in and fill that gap of what we didn't know 25 years ago when this farmer was trying to do it on his field. We know now that we can actually manage nutrients much more specifically. We have software, we have sensors, we have the ability to really match plant nutrients with plant needs. And this is economically important for farmers as well. Certainly, it goes to the point of water quality. Certainly, it gets us to the point where we can minimize the environmental loss of nutrients and maximize their use in plants. But what's interesting about soil health is it goes beyond that, looking at secondary nutrients, calcium, boron, some of these other nutrients that once they get into a soil profile, something changes in the fertility of those soils. A lot of science that needs to be done here, but some really interesting promise. And I think for an investment group like this, a group of people that are interested in land, this is a really important time to lean in and understand what's going on here. The next area is reducing tillage. And this is complex, especially in northern latitudes, where cool soils can be a real problem for getting plants to go early in the spring. But reducing tillage really makes a difference in terms of the biological function of soils. The aggregate stability of those soils, the ability for those soils to kind of stay together and be healthy. And so this is an opportunity. Once we start to kind of ladder into all of these solutions and start to do them together, things start to happen. The last one is diversity of plants in these fields. This is a place, obviously, Iowa, where we have mainly a corn-soybean rotation. It didn't always used to be that way. We actually had much more diverse crop rotations in this state. As livestock went out and specialization kind of took over, we've specialized around corn and soybeans. But what the microbes need in the soil is plant diversity. How do we get that back? And this is where there's a lot of experimentation going on with more diverse crop rotations and also cover crops. Some people are starting to plant cover crops in the shoulder seasons, the seasons right before the cash crop or the season right after. This is a way to introduce some of that biological diversity right back into the environment without moving off of the corn-soybean rotation. Now, why isn't this just happening? Well, there's really good reasons. There's really good reasons. It's operationally complex. There's a gap in knowledge. There's questions about the economics of doing any of these things, let alone all together. So this is really new. This idea that we would actually farm for the purpose of improving soil health. And we would actually put together the right adaptive system for each field, for each farm. There's going to have to be variation. There isn't a single prescription for how to do it. But we are now starting to assemble this knowledge, and that's really exciting. That's what gives me the optimism that this soil health revolution can happen. Okay. We pulled together a team this last year just to ask the question, look, if we care about clean water, if we care about dealing with climate change, if we care about using water more efficiently so that we have water for generations, if we care about living into our mission, how big is this idea? How big is improving soil health relative to that mission? And what we found, without kind of stepping you through all the math here, is we think it's as big as $50 billion a year, annually, in terms of economic benefits once you get them monetized in the market. And the challenge is not all these things are monetized. These are social benefits. These are environmental benefits. So it's not the case that a farmer will actually make more money out of this kind of a chart. This is benefit to society. But this is where an organization like the Nature Conservancy enters in. We enter in, making the case that society would benefit in a way that suggests that we should be involved in investing in this future. We should be helping make this happen. Whether it's better policy or better innovation, it's worth it. It's worth it to future generations. So another way to think about this is a cost. This is a cost to future generations right now. And we can cover that cost with a low-cost solution right now, with a technology around soil health that could make a real difference. We've also kind of looked at this for every 1% of farmland that would move to soil health practices, adaptive soil health practices. And this just comes straight out of the literature. So it wasn't new empirical research on our part. But we get big reductions in nutrient runoff, big sequestration gains in terms of carbon, big reductions in soil erosion, water savings, That all amounts to about $226 million for every 1% of farmland that moves in this direction for society. But what makes this special, what makes this something we want to invest in, is the opportunity to improve farm profits. And so improving yields, improving total factor productivity, $37 million per 1% of farmland that moves in this direction. Probably a conservative estimate. But the point here is it's big enough to matter. It's big enough for an environmental organization like the Nature Conservancy to say, let's go do this. Let's make this happen. Let's go figure this out. So we've actually set a goal, and we're articulating a vision, a call to action. We'd love to see a big move in the cropland areas of the U.S. from where we're at to a goal of getting to a majority of farms farming for soil health, making changes to achieve soil health by 2025. We estimate that if we really look at the adaptive strategies to improve soil health, we've got kind of the low single digits today. So even though there's movement, we're still very small in terms of penetration of cover crops, reduced tillage, nutrient management, all of these things working together. So we've got probably about a 10-fold increase in adoption that we need to see in a very short period of time. So this is a major challenge, major opportunity. And we're casting the vision today to say it's so important, we ought to try to do it. Now, I just mentioned before that there are really good reasons that this is not happening today. So don't hear me suggest that it's easy and that farmers should just, move on with this. It's not the case. There are really good reasons we're farming the way we're farming today. We operate a farm. My family farms. We are doing some of these soil health strategies in some places on the farm and not in others. Okay? And there are reasons for that. They're economic or they're operational. But when we pull the lens back and we think about what are all the barriers, our team came up with 10 things that we think we need to do together. The Nature Conservancy acting as just one partner and a catalyst on an agenda for change, okay, to see this soil health thing happen in the U.S. There's some science priorities. The first science priority is to standardize measurement of soil health. This is too esoteric right now. We need to get really good measurements on what soil health is and make it manageable and operational in a farm so that we have management response information, we can standardize that, we can make recommendations around that, and eventually we could tie market signals to that. A second thing, and one of the reasons that we're here, is we think landowners and farmers have a big task in front of them thinking through this issue. Managing for soil health is fundamentally a long-term proposition. As we know, most of the lease terms between landowners and farmers are shorter term, sometimes as short as 1 year cash rent. Other places, it's crop share and it's handshake and it's long term. But innovating this relationship, financializing the benefits of soil health into that landowner-farmer relationship, that's a big idea. We have no idea how to do that. That's why we're here. Got a collection of really smart people in the room. We need to go figure it out. And I think that there are folks here that if they'd lean in, we could make real progress on that. We'd love to be a partner. Another example is policy. And I want to highlight two things. One is crop insurance. Today, crop insurance represents the single largest transfer between the federal government and farmers. It's a premium subsidy. It's a wonderful investment both ways. But can we actually think about improving the social return and adjusting it for farmers to actually improve the kind of the social value of this contract by remaking it around soil health? If it improves resilience, if it improves yield stability, we should be able to do that. But we don't have the actuarially sound data to make that case today. We need to work on that. Right here in Iowa, though, there's one piece of legislation that we would love to see move forward that would actually come in right now in this state and really support a move on soil health. It's called the I Will legislation, Iowa Waters and Land Legacy. Now, this has been around for a while, and it's going to get considered again in the state legislature. I think there's been a question about the cost of this legislation? Does it actually return value for the cost? And we'd love to see this be brought forward in a revenue neutral way. But we also think it's very important to kind of get this investment going and to make it permanent. Right now, some of these funds transfer 1 year at a time. We'd love to see this be permanent legislation, permanent funding that really supports what we think is Iowa's most important infrastructure, which is the soil in this state. So that becomes an investment that we can make very consistent with the kind of policy that we're calling for. Targeted policies out of the state, better policy federally, get it focused on soils. We think there's more return there than many of the other things we could invest in agriculture today. So, to wrap this up, I want to just put it back to the kind of change that I think will make a difference. This is Tim Smith. Tim is a farmer in Eagle Grove, Iowa. Probably some of you may know him. A very humble guy, a typical farmer for this area, not somebody that's out there making speeches. You'd have to really pry into him pretty hard to learn about his politics or religion. But he's really passionate about this topic. And 10 years ago, he didn't know the first thing about it. So he's a great example of a farmer from the mainstream who's come into this and said, how do I make this work? What brought him into this was his question on water quality. He'd heard about the water quality issues in the state. He said, am I a contributing factor to that? So he put some edge of field monitoring on his farm. And what he found was very disturbing to him. Yeah, I've got more nutrients moving off this farm than I should. So he started working on this with his NRCS representative. We've come around that with a new soil health partnership, so we've made him a demonstration farm. There's now 100 Tim Smiths across Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, the Central Corn Belt, who are working on these practices, doing it in a way where they can actually be observed, monitored, measured, so that we can start to bring some light to this whole topic. So Tim's a great example of what we need. I don't see any way to make a move like this that's this operationally complex, that requires this much change, without people like Tim saying, I'll try it and people can watch me. You know, there's an old saying that any change that happens twice. It happens in the mind before it happens physically. And I would say on this one, it probably happens 3 times. It starts here, because our legacy is a big part of this. You know, if we're going to make changes this big at this moment, there will have to be something beyond just pure economic logic that drives it. It'll have to start here too. So I just want to wrap up and say the Nature Conservancy wants to be a good partner in this state. We are a large environmental organization who stands ready to partner with agriculture to drive voluntary, systematic, and profound changes in the way we farm. We know it's not easy, but we're very optimistic that we can get this done. We're an organization that focuses on the word and, people and nature, conservation and productivity. The and in this is we think we need to remake soils or rethink soils and recharge our bank accounts and renew our conservation legacy. Let's do it together. Thank you.
Michael, thank you very much for the comments, the explanations, and we're going to take questions here. I'll start myself with some, so if you have a question you'd like to have, raise your hand. If we have another microphone in the back, I'll come to you. Let me ask the first one to you. Okay. You know, listening to you almost sounded like I was at a no-till convention 25 years ago, because I found out that it is not just science, it's religion. And the no-till people were going against the grain, literally, as they started out. But obviously, you've carried it a whole lot further than that. And you brought up how you socialize this fertility. But let's talk a little bit about how to merchandise this. In your view, is the organic food movement or any other change that's going on in society suitable to where that your natural fertility that you build can be translated into a farmer being able to say, I can at least make a living on this land, or I can make a living in a unique way on this land if I do this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one of the things I want to really emphasize is this can't be religion. This has to be grounded in science. It has to be grounded in the experience of really solid farmers figuring out how to do this, and then sharing that farmer to farmer. And that's why the Soil Health Partnership, we think, is so instrumental. You've got mainstream farmers who are willing to do this, actually be measured systematically over time, have that data brought forward in a way that could be brought into the peer-reviewed literature. That's good science, okay? So we also have people that are enthusiastic and want to push the curve on this, push forward in terms of innovation. And that's what can also be brought into the light, is how do we actually do that? How do we make that move? You know, I come from a very traditional farm, okay? We have cattle, we have row crops, we're conventional farmers, we use biotechnology, we make no apologies. But the organic movement has gotten something right here, and that is that they've focused on soils from the beginning. They put a focus on soil health as a key metric in their operating system, and they have used heritage techniques to do that. What we now have is the opportunity to kind of merge these worlds, where we don't take away innovation, but we put the focus on soils squarely at the middle of the agenda. And our belief is that, yes, it can drive productivity and profitability. If it didn't do that, we don't think we've got a winning proposition here. So it must do that. Yes, Ken.
Michael, I've got Jim back here, wants to ask a question.
Yes, I'd like for you to maybe bring the slide up again or comment on the amount of the organic loss. You used a figure of 1850 to date,
Yeah.
and maybe just elaborate on this a little bit. Thank you, Michael.
I don't know if they can bring it up from the back there.
Whatever the percentage of loss was.
Yeah, so, here, one thing I want to just say is, look, that's data taken from the Morrow plots, longest continuously monitored plots in the U.S. at the University of Illinois, but it's one field, okay? The soil organic matter level in every field is going to be different, but if from a range, we're probably talking about starting points of 4 to 8% for a lot of the farmland that we now have in the U.S. The literature says that has declined anywhere from 50 to 80% on average across the U.S., okay? The good news is we feel like we can restore most, if not all, of that original soil organic matter by farming in a way that brings back some of that biological diversity of the plant communities. We cut down the respiration by reducing tillage. We manage nutrients in a way where we actually catalyze some of the fertility and the plant availability of nutrients with secondaries and things like that. So bringing back practices that actually kind of mimic the way these soils were originally, okay?
Got one more over here.
I see from your website that you are working on educating America and other countries internationally on climate change. How do you plan to continue a dialogue with the current administration and our Congress on climate change?
Yeah. Well, so we are unapologetic about the fact that we think climate change is a systemic risk. It's a risk to our mission. If you travel the world, you actually see some examples of where this is actually starting to play out. So we are not confused about what we think climate change represents, and that is a real risk to future generations. But we're also very optimistic that in the ways that we're talking about, improving soils in a way that actually improves productivity, but also can start to sequester and store carbon at a meaningful scale. So we're actually advancing a dialogue called Natural Climate Solutions, where we believe that something like 30 to 40% of the near-term emission reductions that we're going to need to be on that 2-degree path that was agreed to in Paris, a lot of that can come through the way that we manage land and coastal ecosystems better, and in ways that are good for economies, okay? So it's not that either or, it's and. Obviously, we're in a difficult political environment, and I actually think that this is an opportunity for the Nature Conservancy to be a trusted source of information. We are nonpartisan. We are committed to being nonpartisan. We are committed to the science. And so we will continue to operate as such and see where the current administration, the current climate takes us.
Michael, one last thing here. With what people know about what they're doing now, going to precision agriculture, utilizing organic material in their own manure at times on their farms, and other technologies, of course, being more precise, is there anything you're going to have to take out of your current mechanism to be able to have better soil health, or just aiming to have that as one of your goals?
Yeah, great question. And you know, some that are out there talking about soil health would say, well, you can cut back on your nutrient application. That's an open question as far as I'm concerned. You know, and we certainly wouldn't suggest to a farmer that immediately starts to try to put some of these practices in that you can start to hedge down on nutrients. But over time, there is some evidence that we can actually mineralize nutrients, especially the macronutrients, more efficiently. So NPK, make them more plant available. Perhaps over time start to reduce total applied nutrients as a part of a production budget. But that's where the question is how much of that can you do? If we can do that, it's a real winner. It goes from being really kind of interesting to something that's really an economic winner for a lot of people. So I want to thank you for your time. You've been very generous. Come see us at the booth. Download our report on the website, and we hope to be back sometime again. Thank you.